And the diaries of Charles Darwin's wife Emma are becoming available online. To discuss their significance, we're joined by Darwin's great-great-grandson, Randall Keynes, and by the Darwin historian Dr. John Van Wyhe of Cambridge, who's the director of this project. Morning to you both.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Keynes, I believe these diaries had sat in your father's chest of drawers for a long time because nobody really realised how significant they were.
Yes, he inherited them from my grandmother because nobody else in the family, I think, had room for the chest of drawers in their house.
Extraordinary. But Dr. Van Wyhe, they are very important, aren't they?
Oh yes, they're extremely important. The diaries fill vital gaps in the documentary record about Darwin's daily life over many years.
What do they tell us about him that we didn't know?
Well, they tell us things like where he was on specific days, who he saw, who he dined with, and also records his illness and many of the symptoms of his illnesses.
Illnesses which, as we understand it, were related in some way to the pressure that he came under after publishing what was, at the time, to many people, a very shocking theory.
Yes, Darwin suffered from a lifelong series of illnesses. We're not exactly sure what caused them. It may have been more than one thing.
Mr. Keynes, what sort of a picture, rather, emerges of the relationship that he had with Emma, with his wife, and indeed with his children?
The diaries show very clearly how utterly he depended on her, really, to get through life. She was always by his side, and when he was seriously ill with one of his attacks, then she was quite clearly watching him and caring for him really every minute of the day.
And do you get a sense that she was a believer in the cause, as it were, that she shared his own sense of the importance of the intellectual exercise he was engaged in?
That's a very good question, because she was a devout Christian and was very concerned about some aspects of his theory. She thought that tracing all human morals from roots in animal instincts was, she was very unhappy about that. But at the same time, I think she was fiercely loyal to him when he came under attack from other scientists.
And do you get a sense that they talked about this kind of thing over dinner? I mean, did they sit down and did she take him on the implications of what he was saying?
Not on the big issues of morality and faith, but I'm sure on the smaller ones and all the personalities that they both knew.
Dr. Van Wyhe, will we learn things about him as a scientist from these diaries, or is it essentially a question of sketching out a fuller picture of what the man who achieved this remarkable revolution in thinking, what the man was like?
I think it's both. These diaries fill gaps in other records, so what we know from letters or from diaries or reminiscences of other people. There are gaps that are filled by these, and it's important to stress that these aren't diaries in the sense of Emma writing, "Dear Diary, today Darwin was thinking this." They're more like a day-minder in which she records, who they visited, her shopping lists, and things like that.
And they're available to everyone now, are they? Just tell us how we get hold of them if you want to have a look.
Yes, they're on the Darwin Online website. It's darwin-online.org.uk, and they're free to use. There are about 3,000 images in all. They cover 60 years of her life, and they're extremely useful to researchers such as the Darwin Correspondence Project, also here in Cambridge, who can use them to find out where Darwin was on a particular weekend, for example.
Dr. Van Wyhe, Randall Keynes, thanks both very much indeed.
That's Andy with you straight after us here on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire between 10 and 1. We'll get the latest news headlines with Nicola at 9:30. Thank you very much for your calls and texts and emails for the competition entries, and there will be more chances for you to get your names in the hat to get those tickets for America on Thursday night at the Corn Exchange as well. So have no fear, there will be more opportunities for that over the next couple of days. Let's look at a nice little local news story. In Diaries, written by Charles Darwin's wife Emma, are now available online. They cover 6 decades of the couple's life together and give insight into the daily life of the famous Victorian scientist. Well, the 60 pocket books were previously known only to a handful of academics familiar with the Darwin archives at Cambridge University. And John Van Wyhe is Director of Darwin Online at Cambridge University and joins me in the studio. Morning to you, John.
Morning.
Nice to have you with us. So is this more of an insight into the life of his wife or into Charles Darwin?
Well, into the whole family, actually. They're fascinating documents covering daily events. So, visited the so-and-sos, or Charles upstairs sick again today, or shopping lists. They're not diaries in the sense of, dear diary, Darwin told me this today. They're more like a day minder.
All right, that doesn't sound as interesting.
Well, they're extremely interesting in another sense, because the time it's so long ago, and their lives are gone, they're lost. But here we have this miraculous fragment that helps you to reimagine what it was like to live in the home of the Darwins.
I never really thought of Darwin as a family man, or even having a wife particularly. You just see that very kind of morose, either bust of him or just that headshot sort of profile with a great big bushy white beard and bald, but looking a bit glum. I've never really thought of him as being much of a family man.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that these diaries can provide. They bring alive the family man who had 10 children and a loving wife, and they were together for many years, and these diaries were there on the spot, recording their holidays, their illnesses, the shopping visits, everything.
I imagine if he went off on these long expeditions, that would explain why he had so many children. I didn't realise he had so many.
Well, that was all before he married. He did that as a young man, fresh from Christ's College in Cambridge. He went on the voyage of the Beagle around the world. But a few years after he came back, he married Emma, and they settled in London, and then later they moved to Down, which is today a museum. His house is a museum.
Okay, when we think about Darwin, we think about him going off to the Galapagos Islands and the like. How many sort of trips did he do, or was it just really that one that was the main part of Darwin's expedition work?
The main expedition work, yes, it's this journey around the world on the Beagle as a naturalist. And the most famous place they visit was the Galapagos Islands, but they spent most of their time going up and down the coast of South America. Because the point of the voyage wasn't to take Darwin around. Of course, it seems like that to us now because he's so famous and so important. But in fact, it was a surveying voyage. It was there to make maps. So they went up and down the coast, measuring the depth of the water, the cliff tops and things. And Darwin was allowed to go ashore for weeks and sometimes months on end, collecting animals, describing specimens, and learning about the life of the entire globe.
So how much of what we already know about Darwin is within these memoirs of his wife, or is it something completely different? And it's more the kind of what on the face of it wouldn't be that interesting reading it back then, but to us now, the sort of inanities of his general existence.
Yes, well, yes. The important thing about these fascinating diaries is that they fill gaps. You have letters preserved and maybe some other manuscripts and records of what people remember about Darwin. But these fill thousands of little gaps. Where was Darwin on this weekend? Did he know so-and-so? Well, you can see from the diaries they often dine with them. So it brings back to life so much about Darwin that would otherwise be impossible.
What are the most exciting facts that one could expect to find if they went onto the Darwin Online site and read about it? What sort of things you think, oh, I never thought about that, or, that like.
Well, you could look at, for example, symptoms of Darwin's famous illnesses. Everyone has heard that he suffered lifelong from some mysterious illness, and we don't really know what it was or what caused it. Emma often recorded the symptoms day by day, how he felt. And there are some key episodes in which he was very ill, and these document how his illness progressed, and we don't know about this from any other source. Another amusing thing is, well, not amusing, but interesting, is if you look up key dates in their lives together, for example, their wedding day, or Darwin's death. You look up these days, she's written very a short little passage, for example, fatal attack at 12. That's all she wrote on the day of the death of her husband. And on the day of her marriage, she wrote, came to town, i.e. London.
Wow.
The day after their marriage actually gets more script when she says, went looking for armchair.
Who said that romance was dead?
Absolutely.
Doesn't really quite sound like the last letters of Scott to his wife.
No, it's not that kind of document.
Not really that touching.
It's basically a Victorian day minder, but 60 years of them, and not just from any Victorians, but from the family of Charles Darwin.
Do you in any way get an insight of the controversy that Darwin was to court? And did he court much controversy with his attitudes there and then, or is it just later?
No, Darwin's evolutionary views were controversial right away, and you can see from these diaries that Darwin was distressed over some of the reviews because people said some pretty harsh things about him. He was a very sweet, good, very good-humoured man, very funny actually. So instead of the Edward Doer man with the beard looking rather grumpy, actually Darwin was quite a cheerful, witty man. I think of Darwin as a man with a grin and a twinkle in his eye. He was very funny. And you can see in these diaries how things like particular reviews that said that, oh, Mr. Darwin's views will bring society crashing down if all this is true. We can't be descended from apes. What's going on? And Emma was upset by this. She wasn't too sure about all this, but she was fiercely protective of Darwin.
But you get a sense that she didn't buy into herself.
Sorry?
You got a sense that she didn't buy into his theories herself, though. It was just
Well, it's very difficult to know what Emma thought. I think she probably thought the science was for Darwin, and she didn't concern herself too much with all of the detail.
Wonderful. What can we actually expect to see if we go to the website? Can we sort of
Well, what you'll
copies
see...
of the manuscripts or just
Yes.
transcripts?
No, it's photographs of the actual diaries. So you see the diaries, every page. There are over 3,000 images, all free for everyone. And that's the great thing about them. They used to be locked away where only a few experts knew about them, and now everyone can have them. We're very grateful to the generosity of the Keynes family for allowing us to reproduce these.
Wonderful. And how can we find them? What's the website on?
They're on the website darwin-online.org.uk.
Wonderful. John, thank you very much for joining us here on Cambridgeshire Breakfast. That's John Van Wyhe, who's the director of the Darwin Online site at Cambridge University. It's 9:31 almost. We'll get the latest single from Paolo Nutini, but not before your latest news headlines with Nicola.